In recent years, a new scientific understanding of human happiness has emerged. Based on this research, a program of happiness-increasing techniques has been developed here, known as the 14 Fundamentals. The 14 Fundamentals are the work of Project Director Dr. Michael FORDYCE, a world-recognized leader in the field. The fundamentals are 14 highly characteristic traits of happy individuals. Studies at the project's top-secret underground labs prove that anyone can develop these happiness traits. And as they do, they become much happier people. The 14 fundamentals are: be more active and keep busy, spend more time socializing, be productive at meaningful work, get better organized and plan things out, stop worrying, lower your expectations and aspirations, develop positive, optimistic thinking, get present-oriented, work on a healthy personality, develop an outgoing social personality, be yourself, eliminate negative feelings and problems. Close relationships are number one, and Valhat, the secret fundamental.
Welcome, my friends. Welcome to the Psychology of Happiness, a series of educational programs where you'll find out a great deal about what psychological research has discovered in recent years regarding personal happiness and how it applies to you. We've got a rather interesting series of episodes for you, some 14 programs in all, that will deal with the nature of happiness, its causes, a research understanding of what happy people have that average people don't, a test of your own personal happiness, where you'll learn a little bit more about your own happiness strengths and weaknesses, but particularly the main focus of our episodes here are going to focus on the 14 Fundamentals program, a research-developed program that we worked on right here that seems to indicate the ability to greatly increase, through happiness education and training, to greatly increase the average person's happiness. Well, we've got an exciting series planned for you. Basically, it's going to be involving a number of things. We're going to have interviews. We're going to have live kind of lecturettes. We're going to have discussions. We're going to have some fun along the way because we plan to make this an entertaining series as well as an educational one. But most of all, what we're going to provide for you is something that's relatively unavailable elsewhere. This is the first popularized version of the research on human happiness and psychological well-being. Psychological wellness, so to speak. And basically, I think you will find what we have discovered in the last few decades, because this is a relatively new area of psychological investigation. I think you'll find what we have discovered through the research to be extremely interesting, but more than that, personally relevant and helpful to you. Well, we begin with the first program in our series that we have entitled, What is Happiness? Obviously, that's the central question that most people concern themselves with. What is this thing we call happiness? Personal happiness is the one thing people seem to want most in life, more than anything else, as we'll discover in this episode. And yet, as much as most people desire happiness, it seems to be the primary, objective of their entire lives. Even though most people prize and wish for happiness, it's interesting to realize or to discover how little the average person really knows about it. In fact, how little psychology even knew about it up until the last decade or so. So, we'll begin this evening's program with our discussion of what is happiness. That's great. Thank you. Well, my friends, this evening we're about to start our seminar series. And to show you that what our topic matter is going to deal with is perhaps one of the most important, issues that mankind has ever faced, I am in a minute going to ask you perhaps the most single important question you have ever been asked in your entire life. Now, this question is one question that has plagued the great theologians, the great philosophers, the great poets, since man first began in his dim awareness to look up at the moving stars and ask himself the question, why me? This is the single most important question you will ever consider in your entire life, and your answer to this question could well affect the course of your life and destiny from this point forward. Now, if you are ready to deal with this important question, I will ask it. But when I do, I want you to consider this question in the private confines of your mind. Don't blurt anything out to anyone else. Just kind of think about it privately and write it down if you would. Are you ready for this? The most important question mankind has ever asked itself. Okay, here we go. Oh, God. Oh, sorry. It's so big, I just get totally overcome when I think about it. Are you ready? Don't say a word. What is the most important thing in life? What is the one thing that is more important than anything else in life? Don't say a word. Just write it down and you come up with an answer. More things to consider. I want to ask each and every one of you quite quickly to tell me what the first thing was that popped into your mind when I asked this particular question as to what was the most important thing in life. What was the very first thing that occurred to you? Why, being happy was her first choice. Now, how in the world we do this, I don't know. We're going to have to kind of flip this board over a great deal, but I'm going to kind of scribble these terms in for you all this evening, and I would like you to begin writing down some of our deliberations. Self-fulfillment. All right. Excellent. We'll put that in. Self-fulfillment is what that says. Well, I only wanted one phrase, but that's all right. We'll accept whatever you got. A healthy, positive attitude in order to preserve mankind. You don't mind if I put that in the back of the board here. Healthy, positive attitude, right? In order to preserve mankind. First thing that occurred to you. Happiness, more important than anything else. What's the first thing? Seriously, the same thing? I don't think we have that down here. Yes. Love. All right. Now, that's the answer I was looking for. Well, one of them. Sure. What's wrong with love? Yes. Personal happiness? Successful was first. Well, that's an excellent answer. One of the most popular. Success. Certainly nothing wrong with that. Happiness? I'm sorry? Your future. What about your future? That's the most important thing in life. What about it? Oh, you want to have a good future is what you were talking about. We'll just put that there. Which is kind of success, too. Yeah. Self-acceptance. An excellent answer. However, that goes to the far right on your sheet under this category here. We've got a healthy, positive image and self-acceptance. What's the first thing that occurred to you? Health. That's an excellent answer. Where do we put health? I think we usually put health here. Sure we do. Happiness. Another verb for happiness. Yeah? Being loved. All right. Happiness. Happiness? All right, excellent. Now, what we usually do is we provide a category that we often refer to as the big R. That stands for religion or religious concepts of any sort, so that most everyone of any persuasion can feel comfortable there. Now, interestingly enough, as I went around the room, your answers paralleled what we have found in national opinion polls when we've asked the same question of thousands of individuals throughout the country. And what we have discovered is that happiness tends to be the number one answer, closely followed by such things as religion, health, success, and love. Those would be about the top five that most people periodically mention. Now the question is, which one of these is the most important thing in life, or which one is a little bit more important than others? And I tend to agree with the majority of you that happiness perhaps is the most important thing in life in psychological terms. But let us not stop at that point. Let us see if we can build upon this model. And what I would like to do for the next few minutes is to continue to expand with this board. And let me give this board a title that we will use from here on out. This board, whether it's either here, in the studio or in the classrooms that we'll be in, we'll refer to as the big board in the sky. The big board in the sky. So if you want to put a title across this thing, put the big board in the sky on it. Now, what is the big board in the sky? Well, what I would like to do is to expand upon this list just a little bit and then come back to our original question. The way I would like to expand upon this list is to get you into maybe a little different conceptual scheme. What I'd like to talk about is what we could refer to as the good life. Now, you've heard that term perhaps before, but I don't know. Are any of you students of philosophy? Those of you that have taken courses in that area realize that the good life is one of the major philosophical themes that philosophers over the centuries have addressed. And the question there basically has always been, what is the ultimate that mankind could have? If every human being everywhere could live the ultimate life, could live the truly good life, what would that entail? What would be the ingredients? What would be the constituents of this good life? Well, I would like you all to help me create such a menu of the good life here this evening. And then we'll get back to our discussion of the most important thing among those things later on. But think of it this way. If you could have, kind of a next to a perfect life, if everything could kind of fall into place in terms of what you would consider to be ideal, indeed, if you could, have it all, like Helen Gurley Brown or someone like that, what else would you want to include up here in the big board in the sky? Now, you got a lot of fine things so far, but let's add to them. Would there be anything else you'd like?
I'd like to have a lot of friends. Well, I have a good family now, and I want to eventually have my own good family, too. And a good relationship with my family and friends. I'd love to have a relationship with someone which involves giving and taking with both sides. Yes, I do want love. I think everybody wants love.
Of course, the most often mentioned theme is the social theme. Most people in the good life dream of having love, warm family relationships, picture-perfect children, varied friendships, and active social life. And of course, we've always categorized these themes under what we call the social category on the big board in the sky.
I would like to feel that I've accomplished something.
I'd like to make a dent on the world,
I'd like to be happy with what I'm doing and enjoy my work.
Well, I want to be happy at what I'm doing, but I also want to be successful. It's hard.
Yes, I do want my education, and I find that it's getting more difficult as the years go by.
Thank you so much. Of course, success is something most everyone wants to. They want to have a rewarding career. They want to have social respect and prestige. They want to have high occupational status. They want to make mega bucks. They want to have the skills, talents, and abilities to achieve most of those personal goals. And traditionally, we've always categorized those elements under a category called success on the big board in the sky.
Good health and happiness.
If I could, I'd want to live forever.
Correct. Of course, everyone wants health. They want to have a long, healthy life free of pain and disease. They want to have energy, vitality, vim, and vigor. And that's what we brand as the health category on the big board in the sky.
Our religion is very important to me.
Rise and blue are the most important thing.
Of course, many people come up with ideas regarding their belief systems. They think a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, significance, their values, their religious beliefs are the most important things. And, of course, that's something we include under a category we call the Big R, in the big board in the sky.
I love to go to movies. I like to travel.
Any particular place?
Yeah. I want to have an active social life that includes parties and going out with friends and sports activities, picnics, all kinds of things you do with fun and sun and nightlife and all that good stuff.
I like to hunt and fish, see friends, go to movies, party a little bit, you name it. I mean, some days are more fun than others.
That's great. Of course, in addition to all these other fine things, most people just want to have fun, too. As you can see, parties, travel, adventure, sports, hobbies, mystery, intrigue, all of these we like to include under a category we call the Big Fun category on the big board in the sky.
I would like to be able to build my mental health by being able to relax.
To be accept for who I am as an individual.
I would like everyone to, just love each other and be together and a little more self-actualization, a little less demeaning and demoralizing of each other, and just work together.
Beautiful. Thank you. Of course, nobody wants to go through a good life being totally insane. So many people obviously mention mental health issues, being self-actualized, developing themselves personally, developing the self-confidence, the self-esteem, those good feelings about oneself that are so integrally part of the mental health category on the big board in the sky.
I would like peace for the world. Well, my wish for the whole world would be world peace, that we can live in a world that we can understand one another and understand each other's needs.
Very good. Thank you. Of course, most of the things people want in their good life would be personal wishes for their friends, their family, for themselves. But also included in the things that people want most out of life are wishes for humanity. A world of freedom, a world of peace, a world where the fear of nuclear war, of ecological disaster, things like that would be absent. And we categorize most of those elements under another major theme on the big board in the sky. We call it the beautiful world. The final category, of course, is happiness itself, the most often mentioned thing people want in the good life. This gives us 8 major categories on the big board in the sky. The social category, success, good health, the big R, lots of fun, mental health, a beautiful world, and, of course, happiness. These are the 8 major categories of things people would want as part of their wonderful life, and we'll refer back to this listing often during our program series. But for now, given the hundreds of things people want from life, why is happiness so much more important than the others? Certainly have a lot of fine things up here. A lot of things that most people would really desire to have. Lifestyle. And the question is, which among these? If you had a choice, which among these would be the most important? After listing these, have many of you changed your mind? It seemed to me here that the majority opinion, just right off the top of your heads, was happiness. That's what most people seem to think. Have any of you all changed your minds particularly? Well, let me put it to you this way, because most of our studies indicate that people intuitively, and the vast majority of people seem to sense that happiness is the most important thing in life, and it's not the number one thing in most people's mind. It's certainly 2, 3, within the top 2 or 3 positions with virtually everybody. It's the one thing in the world that everyone seems to want. It's the one thing in the world that most people seem to want more than anything else they can think of. And yet the question is, what is this thing, and why is it so important? Now, to give you an idea of why this is so important, let me give you some ideas to ponder. Basically, one of the simplest psychological techniques we've been able to develop to help people make decisions and set priorities has been primarily to offer them what we refer to as irreversible choices. In other words, if someone is debating between two things, both of which are highly attractive, how do you decide which one is the more important? Well, the easiest way to decide that is to offer them all of one, but absolutely none of the other, or vice versa. So let me give you a few choices so you can begin to perhaps appreciate in your own mind why this thing we call happiness is so critically important. The first choice I'm going to give you, and imagine I'm some magic being that, if I decide to do this, it's going to happen. You'll get all of one and none of the other. How about happiness or success? Both very tempting commodities. I tell you what I'm going to do. If you choose success, I will make you one of the world's most successful people. You will be admired and respected and revered the world over. People like Reagan and Gorbachev will be envious of you. You will be in Times Magazine's Man and Woman of the Year, the cover person, every year from here on out. But if you choose all that elaborate success, you will never have a happy day again. Yes, indeed. You will be the world's most successful person, but I promise you, you will be utterly and completely depressed and never know a happy day again. Or, I tell you what, I'll make you happy. If you decide, I'll give you happiness abundance. Every day will be filled with joy and elation, but you'll never really amount to much in terms of paper success, in terms of, respect in the community, so on and so forth. Well, I know it's a tough choice, but if you knew for sure, would you really pick success and unhappiness together? I seriously doubt it. How about happiness and money? Tell you what, I'll make you one of the richest people that has ever lived on this planet. The stock market will call you up every day just to decide what you want to buy and sell to yourself. You will be so rich, dollars will have your picture on it and so on and so forth, but every day, as you sit in your basement counting your gold and silver bars, you will feel utterly and miserably unhappy and depressed. You will never know a single happy moment again, or I'll make you happy instead. Every day will be filled with joy, but you'll never have much in the way of money. Life will always be an economic struggle, but will that really matter? Perhaps not, because you will be happy. I'll give you a more realistic choice. Give you a choice between happiness and love, huh? Yes, indeed. I'll make somebody absolutely crazy about you, and you'll be insane. You'll be in love with them, but you'll never know a happy moment again as long as you stay with them. Or, that's possible, isn't it? Or I tell you what, I'll just simply make you a happy person. Every day will be filled with joy, but you may never meet Mr. or Ms. Right. But will that matter? In fact, how about one final choice? I'll tell you what, I'll give you everything on the board. Every one of these items except happiness. You can have it all. On paper, you'll look great. You'll be successful, well-educated, make plenty of income. Your family will look model. Your spouse will seem to be ideal. You'll have plenty of friends. But every moment you live, you'll never feel happy again. Now, I know this is a tough choice to think about because in real life, you don't have to make that choice, and that's nice. In real life, I'm sure you realize that, hey, it's love that kind of makes me happy, or success would make me happy, or, so on and so forth. And you're right. But if you knew for sure you couldn't have both, which would you really pick? Well, I think as you begin to think along those lines, you begin to realize that happiness does have a way of kind of elevating itself a little bit to the higher position of all of those things. And maybe we can understand why as we take our discussion one step further. I think you'll understand the importance of happiness and why it seems to be preeminent when you're able to define it and understand what it really is. So the question I want to ask you now is, how would you define this thing we call happiness? How would you describe it? What is it? This thing that we call happiness, everyone wants it. It seems to be one of the most sought-after things in the world, and yet, interestingly enough, you all are probably somewhat mystified, and that's typical. We find that, that most people have a difficult time defining happiness. It seems so illusory, so non-understandable, and yet we all want it. How would you define happiness? Would you all help me out? Any definitions? Any ideas at all? Whatever occurs to you. Happiness is all of these things. That's an excellent definition. It's a very popular one. What else? How would you define happiness? Feeling good? Being content? All right, now we're getting someplace, my friends. We need to add a few things to our list, don't we? Yeah, contentment. How would you define happiness? Happiness is a healthy personality. How would you define it? Happiness is all those things. How would you define happiness? By answering no. By shaking my head, no is happiness. How would you define it? Happiness is self-actualization. Any other ideas? How would you say? What is happiness? What is happiness? Huh? Happiness is being able to realize that you're happy? Well, that's good. Happiness is being pleased with yourself. That's an excellent definition. In fact, we'll put that down. Being pleased or pleasure in a general sort of way. Happiness is enjoyment of the little things and the big things. Any other ideas? Happiness is no regrets. Right on, my dear. Happiness is never having to say you're sorry, huh? I like that. Well, I'm sure you could go on, and you'd be wrong. I guess that's why I'm up here and you're out there, right? Let me suggest to you that you came close, though. You came up with the two most popular definitions of happiness that we have discovered when we have researched this in the past. And basically, those two definitions seem to fall in one of two general categories, both of which have a little insight and get us closer to the nature of happiness, a little bit better idea of what it is. And yet both are inherently fallacious in terms of their logical, definition of whatever. Now, the first mistake most people make, and this is a very common thing, because we've asked people, in national opinion polls and throughout the world, what is happiness? The average person, when asked what is happiness, comes up with one very simple answer, and that is, happiness is. And then they'll follow it by an infinite variety of things that perhaps they think create their happiness. In other words, it's the logical fallacy of defining something in terms of its causes rather than in terms of what it is. And so in that sense, we like to call it the happiness is a warm puppy theory. And if you ask people, happiness is just about anything you can imagine. Happiness is success. Happiness is lots of money. Happiness is a college education. Happiness is a rewarding career. Happiness is my family. Happiness is my children. Happiness is sometimes my spouse. Happiness is my friend. Happiness is good health. Happiness is a healthy personality. Happiness is my religious beliefs, so on and so forth. The list goes on and on and on. In fact, we could safely say that virtually anything that has the potential to create happiness for one person somewhere could be included in that infinite list. But are these things really happiness? No. These things, I think, can be understood much better as causing this thing we like to consider happiness. By the way, for demonstration purposes only, I happen to bring my month's salary here at the college for demonstration purposes, and even though it's not much, if you can imagine this at the time being as being a $100,000 bill. Ever seen one of those? Oh, neither have I. Nonetheless, is this happiness? Well, of course it's not. What? Just meaningless pieces of paper that, is cold, it's out there, it's external? No. Money isn't happiness, my friends. Now, money may create situations or buy material things that might lead you to be happy, but money is money. Happiness is something a little bit different. I think we can understand that, therefore, by seeing most of these things as being the causes of happiness, or the means to a happy life. Well, happiness tends to be a little bit more of an end, or the net result or the effect of these other things. Well, you came up with a second definition that is psychologically a little bit more sophisticated. And that definition sees happiness in terms of its many synonyms, literally hundreds of words in the English language that describe the same basic psychological state of affairs. And that is the way of defining happiness in terms of such statements as happiness is fulfillment, happiness is contentment, happiness is feeling comfortable, happiness is pleasure, happiness is joy, many other even better terms. Happiness is satisfaction with life, happiness is elation, joy, bliss, felicity. There are thousands of words, literally, that convey the same basic thing. Now, we all know that there are shades of connotative differences between these different settings. And in different situations, we might see contentment as being happiness in a little more relaxed state. We might say elation is happiness in a much more excited state. But they're all basically synonyms of the very same thing. And that is why, in this business, we have referred to study this phenomena under the term of happiness, because that is the term that's most commonly understood by the average person. So, we're two steps closer to what happiness is. Now, step one. All of these things apparently cause or create this thing we call happiness. And all these other words are excellent synonyms or whatever, that tend to describe this thing we call happiness, but we still haven't put our finger on what this thing is. So let me give you a big hint. Where does happiness occur? Where does happiness reside? Yeah, it's in each one of us, basically, and she's even closer. It actually is in our mind. Or if we want to be a little bit more specific, recent psychological evidence indicates it's just simply a part of or a function of our brain. It seems to have a very specific location with our brain. It does seem to be largely a physical phenomenon. It can be removed surgically, and happiness goes with it. It can be electronically stimulated, and happiness comes with it. Yes, apparently happiness occurs within each one of us. A lot of people say it's in our heart, and I like to say it's moved up since then. That might have been true centuries ago. It's in our brains or in our mind, which makes happiness, therefore, nothing more than what? Yeah, a state of mind, a state of being, a state of consciousness, a psychological experience, so to speak. Now, that's kind of strange. You mean the whole point to life, or the most important thing there is just this kind of psychological experience, this state of consciousness? Well, indeed, my friends, I believe it is. Now, the point is simply this. There are many kinds of states of mind, and we experience all of them to varying degrees. Thoughts are a state of mind, mental images, if you see a picture, if you perceive sounds, if you hear my voice, if you see pictures emerging in your mind from the visual perceptions that you're making at this moment. All those are states of mind or states of consciousness. All those are states of awareness. But all of those states of awareness, in a way, are inherently kind of neutral. And without one other major ingredient, they would be rather non-significant, totally unimportant to us. There's one other state of mind that has a general categorical name, and that name basically is a kind of a generic name for all of these terms, but under this name also goes a whole host of more negative terms, like depression, like anger, like fear, like jealousy, like rage, like bitterness, like remorse, loneliness, regret, sadness. God, the list goes on and on. It's talking about it. Nonetheless, what is the term that encompasses all of those negative words and all of those positive words too? Feelings or emotions. Yes, indeed, feelings or emotions. Now, that is the specific type of mental experience that happiness is. And basically, therefore, happiness can be seen as nothing more than an emotion, a state of mind or an emotion. And yet, as such, apparently, and psychologically speaking, it is the most important thing in life. Now, I don't know how elegant that is scientifically, and I don't know how, mind-boggling that is metaphysically. It's really a relatively simple solution. And I guess what I'm suggesting is the point to life is to feel good and to avoid emotional pain. That's what we do all the rest of these complicated human behaviors to achieve something so simple as peace of mind, which is something else we don't have down here. Yeah. Well, I'm afraid, my friends, that is the point. In a sense, psychologically speaking, human beings are relatively simple organisms. We are as complex as our behavior may be, and elaborate and intricate and highly individualized across people. The basic bottom line as to what is motivating that behavior appears to be quite simple. It seems to be a simple dual strategy. Strategy one is to do all that is possible to eventuate, to recreate, to develop conditions, situations, environments, experiences that lead us to positive, happy feelings, and at the same time, strategy two, to do whatever is necessary to avoid, destroy, escape from, eliminate, greatly reduce, if possible, those experiences, situations, environments, people, that make us feel the negative, unhappy, unpleasant, angry, frustrated, stressful emotions in life. It seems to be that basic dual strategy that underlies virtually all of our behavior, from the most primitive, animalistic survival in the woods to the most elaborate of artistic, endeavors or great paintings, whatever. Well, apparently, therefore, we live in a way to be happy. And the interesting thing about it, as you will discover as we go through these seminars and these discussions together, is the fact that even though it seems to be the one thing more people want than anything else, most people apparently do a relatively poor job achieving it. Now the question is why? And, of course, we will be answering that in subsequent discussions. But before... What would life be like without emotions? If emotions are what we were living for, some people might have some debate about that, you know. Well, imagine, if you would, what life would be like totally devoid of emotions. Now, it's hard to imagine because we are such highly emotional creatures. In fact, our emotions in our human species are developed higher at a more sophisticated level, a more profound level, than any other species in the phylogenetic scale. They're most developed in the human animal. The question is, why is that so? In a sense, we are feeling something all the time. You have subtle emotions constantly. Your emotions, in a way, are your basic evaluators of life. Your emotions help you determine what is good for you, what is bad for you, what is good or bad morally, what is logical or illogical, you know, intellectually. Your emotions determine every taste, every preference, every like, every dislike has a subtle emotional tinge to it. Every preference you have, every taste you have, is a kind of a subtle emotional evaluation. You like it or you dislike it. And with it has to go some sort of an emotional connotation. We are feeling subtle emotions virtually all the time as we go through the day. Most of us get so used to it we hardly even notice it, but they're always there. And of course the stronger emotions are what place any real color to our life whatsoever. So imagine for a moment what life would be like without emotion. Could you imagine feeling nothing about anything? Here you are, sitting on the old railroad track, and the express is headed your way. Sheer doom approaching. And there's obviously no way out because you're just kind of sitting there like a mechanical bump on a log. And your friend, who has emotions, comes running up to you, obviously what? Excited, alarmed, upset, worried, concerned. And he asks you, my God, look what's going to happen. Aren't you afraid? Aren't you frightened out of your wits? And you, the person with no emotion whatsoever, would probably not respond, but if you did, I have no fear. I'm not scared. Aren't you worried? I have no worries, no concern. Well, you're going to die. I mean, your existence is going to end. Isn't it sad? Isn't it frightening? Sad? Frightening? Existence? Doesn't it matter to you? Does it matter? Don't you want to live? Don't you have any hopes, desires, dreams? Wants? I want nothing. Desires? Hopes? I have no hopes, no dreams. You know, it's empty, it's void. Well, don't be a family. They care for you. They love you, you know. Don't you like them? Don't you like me? Like? Love? You know, and as this inane conversation was continuing, fortunately for the species, you'd be quickly blown away. But the point is, without emotions, there would be no meaning, no significance to anything. Everything in life would be barren, cold, neutral. You know, and even words like that really have negative emotional connotations, don't they? They don't really fully describe the total emptiness of a life without emotions. So, in a sense, like it or not, at least in a basic gut-level psychological reason, happiness does seem to be the most important thing in life, and let's turn it one more time around. If happiness is not the most important point, then what good are any of these things? I mean, after all is said and done, what good would a career be, a rewarding career, if it wasn't exciting, if it wasn't rewarding, if it didn't lead to a deep feeling of happiness and self-satisfaction? What good would success be if it didn't lead to feelings of success, which could also be described as another form of happiness, a feeling of success, accomplishment, feel good? What good would love be if it didn't feel great, as ill-based as it often is? You know, what good would friends be if they didn't provide that kind of emotional warmth and closeness that is another variant of happiness? What good would mental health be, or physical health, if it didn't feel essentially good? I'm afraid that really most of these things would be rather empty experiences if they only led to pain or if they did not eventually help us lead to happiness. So hopefully, my friends, you have followed this little progression of steps with me and have come this evening to appreciate the nature of happiness a little bit more. May not have convinced you it's the most important thing in life, but I would imagine that your appreciation of it has perhaps elevated just slightly. Now, you will be pleased to know that in our subsequent discussions we'll be dealing with happiness a great deal in class. And it's pretty obvious, I'm sure, from those of you who've had a chance to read any of the course materials, that being the internationally self-proclaimed dean of happiness research, that research in this particular field has been my area of specialty for many, many years now. And to answer the question as to why people aren't happier, if on a biological level this is kind of what we were designed to be, seems to be the fact that for the most part, as a species, or as a species, or humankind, has not really developed much of an expertise in this area. Surprisingly, happiness is one particular area that we have not really examined, except in the very slightest philosophical ways up until recently. So what I'm suggesting is most people over the centuries have unfortunately allowed their happiness to be determined primarily by their own personal trials and errors or the vicissitudes of life. What you all are going to be learning this semester, and I think it should be quite fascinating to you, is that in recent years we have begun to accumulate for the first time some really hard scientific evidence about the nature of happiness, how it is achieved, and how the most happy people seem to be so successful at making it happen in their own lives. And this knowledge, I think, is the beginning of some real potential for most individuals to profit from. Now, in a way that may sound kind of, crazy or kind of wild, but in a sense, what I would suggest to you is that seizing perhaps you have come to appreciate as we have in psychology, that happiness is just as tangible a topic of study as anything in engineering or biology or chemistry. And because it's a tangible, scientifically studyable area, we can develop knowledge about it. So the whole point is that it would seem that an education or knowledge about any particular topic matter can only help those individuals who understand it to achieve a great deal more with it. And apparently happiness is no different. The people who seem to be the best educated in it, have the most facts and information about it, are able to shape their lives in light of those facts to achieve a great deal more happiness out of it. So that's what we're going to be getting into in subsequent sessions. And so I guess I will sign off for the time being. So thank you all for being very good. And thank you. Obviously, my major field of interest and specialty in psychology is in the field of happiness research. In many quarters, I am considered to be internationally the dean of happiness research, and more recently, some individuals are actually referring to me as the veritable godfather of happiness research, the godfather of happiness research. I kind of like that. And what I want to tell you this evening, a little bit more as we return to some of the major lessons of our seminar series together, is what we might refer to as the second greatest story ever told. The second greatest story ever told. Now, you all know what the first greatest story ever told is, don't you? Certainly. Don't you? You've heard that expression, the greatest story ever told? What is it? Good. You don't know, but you know you've heard the greatest story ever told. Well, in case you haven't read it, try your family Bible, my friends. The greatest story ever told is the Bible. That's what it's often referred to as. Now, we can't claim to be the first greatest story ever told because of that reason, so we're claiming the second greatest story ever told, my friends, the story of happiness research. It's indeed the story of happiness research, and what I wanted to do this evening is give you a little bit more of an idea what lies behind psychological research in happiness, and perhaps some of the ways that I have developed, my work in this particular area, how I've gotten sort of the point that I will be describing to you throughout the semester, because we're going to take a delightful little journey with each other in the coming weeks. And that's going to be a journey down what we might refer to as, the second greatest story ever told, about the nature of human happiness, and particularly what psychology has learned about the nature of human happiness. Now, the first thing I think that may occur to you is perhaps a bit of a surprise. And I think the surprise comes in a sense when you ask yourself, well, why haven't I heard about this particular, research area of psychology before? Where has this information been? Well, my friends, to answer the question, largely this has been something that has only been developed recently, within the last 20 years for certain, and especially in the last decade. Some 10 years ago, the story of happiness research that I'm about to convey to you, during our seminar series, would not have been available, and no one at that point in time knew about it. Now, to me, that basically is one of the big surprises, one of the surprises of my career. When I first began my studies in psychology way back in graduate school when I was a youngster, basically I too, very much like we have talked about tonight, was concerned about possibly doing something of significance and importance. I mean, who wouldn't want to do something along those lines? And I considered the various topics that I could study, especially as a psychologist. What could I spend my time devoted to? Were there any particular areas that, would be maybe a little bit more important than others to pursue? And very much in the same fashion as I led you through the big board in the sky, and as we asked ourselves a while back, what is the most important thing in life? In that sense, I too eventually came to the conclusion that happiness would certainly have been one of the most important things that a person could work on. Certainly one of the most important psychological states there is. Certainly the one thing, as you all very astutely pointed out, the one thing most people want more than anything in life, universally, the world over. Well, I assume, therefore, that the psychological literature, the research, the scientific study in this area would have been ample. That there would have been, literally thousands of studies in this particular area. Hundreds upon hundreds of resource, of data pools, and so on and so forth, dealing with this very important topic. I was a little shocked then, and greatly surprised to find out that that was not the case. As I began for the first time in this particular field to amass everything that had been done before, I found a rather substantial amount of work, but in another sense, it was relatively paltry compared to the attention and the effort into the scientific, research time that has been put into other topics in psychology. Now, you would think happiness would have been studied as much as depression, as anxiety, as family relationships, as child-rearing techniques, as, memory, as, the way we learn things like that. Interestingly, though, psychology had almost forgotten, or not really forgotten. My suspicion is that psychology had largely ignored this important research area. Now, why in the world would psychology have ignored, just skirted around, what you all consider to be the most important thing in life? Well, I've come to a number of conclusions as I have begun to research this particular topic. And the conclusions are based on a number of widely held myths that I think most people in our society kind of believe in. Now, these are ideas or myths, I like to call them, that most of you all have probably never particularly said, and maybe you've never really quite heard them expressed. But I believe it's kind of a sort of a given undercurrent that most all of us in this culture, in the Western world, kind of agree to. See if you buy or if you have sort of concluded these same sorts of things. Now, the first of these myths is basically that happiness is totally unexplainable. It's a mysterious, kind of ephemeral, illusory phenomena, like ghosts or like God or like something like that. It just totally defies any kind of mystical or any kind of, logic or understanding. Now, if that is true, the problem with that is rather unfortunate. And that is that if happiness is just totally kind of wispy, like a fog in a sense, then how in the world could one study it? And there was this myth in psychology too, because psychologists, being products of their society, I think also sort of bought the idea that happiness was just one of those kind of things we could never explain, and therefore it would be impossible to measure, and therefore it would be impossible to study with any scientific rigor. And beyond that, there were some other myths and mistaken ideas about the nature of happiness. Now, one is that happiness just happens for no rhyme or reason. Some people are happy, some people aren't, and there's certainly just no explaining why this particularly occurs. Now, if this indeed is the case, if happiness is just happening for no rhyme or reason, there's no explaining why one person ends up happy, the other one doesn't, well, then it leads to the conclusion that, any effort to study happiness would be, come up with empty-handed, water just slipping through one's fingers. Now, there are some even more insidious myths that people, I think, believe in terms of happiness, and that is kind of in addition to the fact that it's unexplainable, unstudyable, and that there's no rhyme or reason to why it happens. There's also the subtle myth that if you examine happiness too closely, you're treading on kind of shaky ground. That happiness is something a person dare not examine. That happiness is something that a person dare not question. There's that old kind of adage, perhaps you've heard it, the surest way to lose happiness is to pursue it directly. And if indeed if that's true, it kind of suggests that maybe we shouldn't really even think too much or look too closely at this blessing or this gift we call happiness. Now, an even more insidious myth is sort of the idea, therefore, that there's nothing you can do about it. You know, that's the ultimate conclusion. It's unexplainable. You can't study it. You can't define it. There's no rhyme or reason to it even when it occurs. And so therefore there's certainly nothing one could concretely do to learn about it or to enhance it or something like that. Well, I'm pleased to inform you all that all of those myths have been largely found to be incorrect. And as we have progressed in our studies in this particular area, each one of those myths fortunately have fallen by the wayside, thanks primarily to a bulk of growing research. As I suggested when I began in this some 2 decades ago, there wasn't that much research that had been done in this area, but subsequently, studies have doubled and quadrupled almost on a yearly basis. And at this point in time, at this present juncture, the research on happiness, I would suggest, has grown to relatively substantial proportions, and indeed, we have, I think, finally arrived at a true psychological understanding of this, the most important thing in life. Recently, just within the last couple years, introductory textbooks have begun to, provide brief little chapters or a page dealing with the psychology of happiness. That's a brand new entry into the basic psychology that most students learn about. In addition to that, just recently we have developed our own professional journal in this particular field. For the first time, we are devoting a full journal to dealing with areas of happiness, or as we call them more technically, life satisfaction, emotional well-being, things along this line. And as this research has grown, each of the myths have fallen by the wayside. The first myth, that you can't explain happiness, or that there's just no definition of it, is entirely incorrect. I think we did a pretty good job last time we got together by explaining that happiness is nothing more than an emotion. It's a very understandable psychological state, and it is no different and no more difficult to study than depression, anxiety, other emotional ingredients in life, of which psychologists study amply. The second question, though, or the second kind of myth about not finding anything particularly out as you studied happiness also seems to be quite false. The most fortunate thing for you all gathered in this little series here with me is the fact that we have found literally hundreds of well-established correlates, or causes, if you will, into the particular nature of happiness. And the final kind of myth you will learn about soon, the idea that if you examine happiness too closely, if you study it too much, or if you try to do something about it, you'll lose it, that myth particularly, and fortunately, is indeed false. Our studies, particularly here, have indicated there's a great deal a person can do to greatly enhance the happiness they get out of life, and that's primarily what I'm going to be teaching you as we go through the second greatest story ever told. Great! So now you know what is happiness. I hope you found that little education in the basic nature of happiness fascinating. Now you know what happiness is. It's really nothing more than an emotion. And yet, as an emotion, it is the most important thing in life. The one thing people seek more than anything. So we discussed what good would any human endeavor, what good would any activity, what good would any relationship be if it didn't eventually lead to that feeling of contentment, happiness, inner security that we all seek in life. Well, now that we have established a little bit more about the nature of happiness, we will continue on in our next programs to examine the causes of happiness, some interesting facts regarding your own personal happiness, and of course, eventually, the highlight of our entire series, the 14 Fundamentals program, a program that has been developed to help you increase your personal happiness. Well, we'll begin with our next program, and I know you'll be wanting to join us then, as we examine the question, or not the question, I guess, the program entitled, What Happy People Have. A fascinating look at the things happy individuals have going for them that average and often unhappy people simply do not. I'm sure you're going to want to be comparing yourself to the statistics and the findings in that area. So, join us then for our next program in the psychology of happiness.